Thank you, everyone. It's always a challenge to have a session after lunch, but I can still see a very decent number of people out there in the audience. And so let's start. Let me first introduce this distinguished panel. Starting from my extreme left is Sumashri Sarkar, who is from The Wire in India. She's based in Kolkata. An award-winning journalist, winning an award on a climate issue about women and their health. After that is Mr. Ali Taqi Sheikh. Ali Taqi has been writing on environmental issues, on climate change for a very long time, but before that, he had remained an activist and a campaigner on environmental issues. So he is one of those solid people who can speak about journalism as well as what is happening in the environmental industry and the climate change area. So we will hear from him too. After that is a person who is known to almost every journalist in Islamabad. Nirupama Subramanian was the correspondent for The Hindu in Islamabad for almost 4 years and a household name in the journalist fraternity over here. But other than that, she has worked for not only for The Hindu, she has worked for the Indian Express. These days, she is a freelance writer, mostly writing on South Asian affairs. Then comes Mr. Mushahid Hussain. Mr. Mushahid Hussain is the former editor of The Muslim and wrote on several issues, mainly on politics, but other matters also. And then he decided to move on and join politics and was a senator in the Pakistani parliament for a very long time. After that is Mr. Kanak Dixit. Kanak Dixit is a Nepali journalist. He's the founder, editor of Himal magazine, a magazine about South Asian affairs, not just about politics, but on environment, on climate, and he is one of those optimists who think that through this magazine, he can introduce changes in this region. Then comes our guest from the UK, Emilia Maichusuk. She is the climate editor of the Financial Times. She has been with the Financial Times for over 20 years. But as a journalist for many more years, she has been in New York, she has worked from Australia, she is now presently working from the UK, and she will tell us how important it is to have a climate and environment hub in a newsroom, and we will learn a lot from her. Then comes Mr. Mahfouz Anam. Mahfouz Anam is a veteran Bangladeshi journalist, founder editor of the Daily Star, and a person from whom I have personally learned a lot, and we will hear a lot from him about the challenges of climate change in Bangladesh and the rest of South Asia. So let's start this discussion. I'll try to keep it as a more interactive session rather than people going to the podium and delivering speeches so that the audience can also be involved in this discussion. A few months back, when Dawn decided to have a campaign about climate change called Breathe Pakistan, many people were skeptical about it. Many journalists within Dawn were not sure whether this will take us anywhere. Everyone wanted to know what the whole campaign is about. People admitted that yes, it was an important issue. It is an issue that needs to be raised. But in a country where the majority of the people are obsessed with politics, with the economic situation, people were really questioning the very fact that we are now insisting on a campaign about climate change. But most of us were proven wrong because the management kept insisting that no, whether we lose money in this campaign or not, we will continue will go with this campaign. And today we are here, sitting here with a very successful conference just to highlight the issue of climate change. This is a real success story as far as Dawn is concerned, and as well as far as the media in Pakistan is concerned. How it happened, why it happened is a long story, but let me go into a discussion about what is happening in the rest of the region, in the South Asia, as well as in the entire world. So starting with Mahfouz Anam. Mahfouz, this is a serious issue in Pakistan, in South Asia. People keep talking about how global North has really affected what is happening in global South. But are journalists and media houses in South Asia really serious about this issue?
Definitely not as much as they should be. I mean, I think we journalists are really missing a very important point. You see, we have many issues, you know, lack of education, poverty, this and that. I mean, our countries are full of stories and many failed stories. But climate change is one challenge which we have to respond to and rise up to within a certain amount of time. Please keep this in mind. It is not, you know, okay, we failed this year, we do it next year or the year after. No. If the world's temperature goes beyond a certain threshold, I think it's 2.5 degrees centigrade, then the whole climate change becomes irreversible. After that, you spend all your resources and all your energy, nothing happens. It is like some disease in your body. If you take medication up to a certain point, beyond that you will not get well again. So do we really understand it? We love our country, we love our culture, we love our people, love, love, love. But our very existence is going to be threatened. Your cultural identity, your rich heritage are all under threat. So that is the point where I want to begin. That is how we journalists must feel it. Now, politicians have their own time limit. They get elected for a certain time. After that, what happens? Then the bureaucrats have their own attitude. I think of all the professions, journalists have the biggest flexibility to do it. And that's where I would like to appeal to you. Now, let us begin with the frank admission that we in South Asia have really failed to cooperate as much as we should have, as much as we could have. You know, in various factors, you know, education, poverty alleviation, healthcare, I mean, all of us have our own experiences. Some of us have succeeded in some manner, but we have not shared it. There are many lessons to learn from Pakistan for Bangladesh, from Bangladesh to India to Pakistan, a lot of experiments. But we really haven't changed that. Now, I want to say to you that whatever be the level of our regional relationship, whatever be the level of relationship between Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, I mean all of us, Nepal, however is our misperception, however is our distances, however is our deep suspicion of each other, whatever negative vibes we have about each other on climate change, we have to
Mahfouz, one thing. Then why are editors and owners not investing in this area? Why climate desks are not being set up by newspaper organizations, by other media houses? Why? What is stopping them from doing it?
I think realization, a mindset, and everybody, I heard this was a few minutes ago, somebody says, yes, climate change is very good, but we have to have a business model to solve it. Maybe our owners, the newspaper owners, are also looking at business model. We are dying and you are looking at a business model of how to take care of the dead bodies or something. So, to answer your question, I think our own management, some of them are progressive like the Dawn, but many of us are really stuck in our own mindset and not realizing that this is a problem that has to be solved within a time frame.
Thank you, Mahfouz. I'll move to Sumashri. Sumashri, you are one of the very few organizations in India who have got a proper climate desk who work on it. You yourself have been dealing with these issues. Are there newspapers and media houses in India who have realized the importance of having a climate desk in their newsrooms, and is it more than just blaming the global north about it, or doing something what is happening in India and around India?
Thanks, Zafar. You're right that the Wire, the news organization I work for, we're very small. We have only 50 people, but we do have a dedicated climate journalist, and many people in our organization do report on climate. This is not replicated in the mainstream media. We usually have independent media doing the work that needs to be done when reporting on climate. This is one of the main reasons for this is that there has been a watering down of the environmental laws in India in the past few years. And we are lucky that just before this conference started, Reuters Institute, they released their media audience and climate report, where they found that India and Pakistan are two countries where government sources have increased as feeders of climate news in the past year, in 2024. So for a country where you need to depend on government sources to make a report legitimate, it's not going to be very likely that you point to the right things when it comes to climate. Another reason, of course, is that we are no strangers. The Indian media definitely isn't to finding a catchy headline, to reducing a problem to a single reason. So a flood has happened, that must be because of some glaciers melting. No construction in the way of the river is mentioned. And if it is, say a journalist does want to get to the bottom of it, they don't have the resources, the right people to ask or better. So in our, as digital organizations, as and in a country where where most of the conversation is happening online, we suffer a little bit because we want a very ready report on a climate issue, which might involve more than one agent, which might involve the government in some way, which might involve local governance, their failures, and so I feel like even if mainstream media is interested, these are two reasons why they suffer.
Thank you. Ali Tawqir, you have been a campaigner on environmental issues, on climate change for a very, very long time, and now you regularly write on these issues. Do you think anyone is interested in it?
Thank you. Well, since you referred that I've been interested in these issues for a very, very long time, and since climate reporting is about storytelling, let me tell you a story first. The story began in 1901, 125 years ago. We all remember when gramophone was invented, and you remember his master's voice, no pun meant for journalism. The biggest challenge at the time was for classical music. Here is a recording that has to finish in a few minutes, less than 10 at the time, or 5 or 7. And our classical musician needed an hour and a half to warm up before the night begins for their performance of classical music. Since then, there is no going back. We see that messages have becoming shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter to that extent that now in Instagram you are expected to communicate in less than 1 minute. And when travel restrictions are so hard in the region, we have to somehow think beyond print media and see how do we are at that stage 125 years ago where gramophone was so many years ago. No, but we forget one point that I want to highlight, and that's related to your question. To the extent that I know, every climate issue is in essence a regional climate issue. There cannot be a national solution. River flows, most of our rivers are transboundary. Cloud outbursts in Nepal and Uttarakhand, we see that. We have cloud outbursts, Kashmir, and Sialkot gets inundated. We have in Kaabu River Basin and Nushara gets.
No, your point is well taken. What I'm saying is that we keep writing about it, we keep talking about it. Are our readers, our audiences really interested in it? Just take the example of Pakistan and India and probably even Bangladesh, where people say, oh, let's talk about politics, let's talk about what is happening to the opposition, what is happening to the government, what the government is not doing. In that kind of situation, are people really interested in climate journalism?
While disaster reporting continues to be important, reader is looking at three things at least. One, as my colleague just mentioned, nuanced coverage. The reader is also interested in solution-oriented approach, not doomsday scenario. We are tired of that. And third, which is also very important, reader wants to learn what is happening in similar ecosystems elsewhere in the world. A Pakistani fisherman living on the same coast wants to know how a Bangladeshi is handling, what kind of responses are coming. What is happening in the glacier melt in Pakistan is of great interest to people in Nepal and elsewhere. So that kind of regional learning is absolutely important. If we narrow it down to a silo of a particular country, let's say Pakistan, and we ignore what's happening in India in terms of urban planning or heat waves, the reason I mentioned the regional context of it, everything that happens elsewhere happens here. In sometimes it starts elsewhere before it comes here, so it has become very predictable. Monsoon ferocity in India will tell you what kind of monsoon I will have. Monsoon ferocity in Punjab tells me what will happen in Sindh in 10 days time or 7 days time. Equally true about heat waves, equally true about droughts, equally true about urban congestion and smog and pollution. So I think one of the reasons that we have failed to communicate our narrative, we are using the same prism that we use for security. That is adversarial relationship. We are not looking at it as a non-traditional threat to ourselves. And in non-traditional threat, it can be a win-win-win. It's not zero-sum like security paradigm. And in this case, intelligence is more important than conventional security. Only difference is intelligence in this case is with small I. More interest in what is happening in terms of science and research in other countries, other dominions and spheres has become far more important for us to communicate to our readers. And I can vouch for it that the interest is immense, it's huge. It's just that we are not able to always produce that quality.
Thank you. Let's move to a person who is more experienced in managing a newsroom where climate change is a serious issue. There is a hub in it. Amelia, you work for the Financial Times and you're the editor of climate change over there. Just tell us how long it took you people to realize the importance or the need to have such a desk. When was it created, and is it making any difference?
Yes, and thank you. I'm very honoured to be here, actually, because it's a extremely informed and sophisticated discussion and audience. So when you ask a question about, is climate change reaching people, or is there an audience, I don't think that's the question. The question is there's some frustration about this, what they call inertia, perception inertia also. People are very interested, but they can't see any action coming. So that's where we also play a role. So at the Financial Times, we've always had a very senior correspondent as the environment reporter. Okay. But she was then new in January 2020, editor Rula Khalaf who was previously the foreign editor and Middle East editor.
And she became the editor.
She became the editor in January 2020, the first female editor.
Yes, yeah.
And she set 3 priorities for different areas she wanted to expand in. And they're telling areas. One is data journalism, data and visualization journalism. These things are linked. And also climate, elevating climate to be joined up. And the third one was video. So we take advantage of all of those 3 things. Actually, I do as a climate editor. And this meant that I have a unique role where I work across the world and across different reporting segments. So I have dedicated 3 climate reporters. I can commission them, but I can also commission the airlines writer or the oil correspondent or the minerals. On
anything linked with climate.
On anything related to climate. Sometimes I commission them on things that are unrelated to climate because I can't help myself. I have an idea and I say, you should do this idea. But on climate, and then I can edit that story, or I will encourage other colleagues, other editors also to edit those stories, because I want the ownership to be and the knowledge to be throughout the newsroom. I don't want to hold the knowledge. One of the things that surprised me, I've been a business journalist for more than 30 years, one of the things that surprised me about climate reporting and climate journalism and climate information is how much jargon there is, how much knowledge holding there is. People in the climate world seem to, particularly unfortunately, at levels like the UN and other very informed areas, they hold the knowledge and they mask it with acronyms and so on. In financial markets, they do that also, because as a financial journalist, I saw that, But actually, financial journalists want to explain the jargon that maybe they're taught to because they have to teach themselves. So I don't see so much explanatory journalism happening in climate. So they're trying to put it in as simple as possible language, because it's quite complicated. The physics is complicated. The science is complicated. That's why changing energy systems is complicated, and we have this problem with inertia.
So, Amelia, the reason to have this desk emanated from the fact that your team or your editor wanted to inform the readers about the climate issues, or there was a demand for it?
I think it was a question of both. She's very far-sighted, and she could see, just as she could with data visualization and video, the other examples of expansion that we've had, that climate change needed to be approached in a holistic way, not in a silo. So we're very much about breaking down the silos. But one thing I wanted to pick up, you referred to sort of media ownership loosely here, and I think media ownership is really, unfortunately, in a way, very important in setting some of these directions in what we cover as journalists. And so it's a push-pull. It's the audience demands. The audience is interested. And if she had not picked that up as editor, she wouldn't have made it a priority in the newsroom. And also by backing it publicly as the editor, it sends a message to the rest of the newsroom that this is an area she believes is important and we need to focus on. So it's not easy, but it's really worthwhile.
Thanks a lot. Nirupama, whether it's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many other countries in South Asia and many more countries, it's not just about people discussing politics, but the kind of oppressive systems we have seen where there are curbs on the media, there are other ways to go after the media. What we have noticed is, and I would like your opinion on that, is that in some ways writing about climate also becomes an issue of press freedom, because there are lots of projects that are directly or indirectly linked with the government, with the state, and when you try to highlight those things, like writing about fossil fuel, writing about coal-fired power plants, and the government will take it as an attack on the government or the state. Is it an issue in India as well?
So, Zafar, you've touched on a very important aspect of all this, which is that, the climate for media itself has changed so much, pardon the pun, because, there's so many now factors at play. including social media, who's fake news, somebody's fake news is somebody's truth, and then of course the political climate, which is so now dependent in India on government advertisements. So we are all bound by that, that unstated, you know, I wouldn't say unseen, but unstated kind of self-censorship that plays a very important role in Indian media now. And also, you know, some points in the news are not really decided in newsrooms anymore. They come from elsewhere. So there are these issues. And people do write about developmental issues, as they are called right now, which means this is how Indian media has traditionally covered environment and infrastructure as a you know, as oppositional issues. Either you safeguard the environment, and I'd say environment now it's called climate, but in an earlier avatar it was called environmental journalism. And so there's always this conflict, whether you cover, whether you give priority to development of the nation, or you're going to be caught in environment issues. So the Narmada Dam, which was a big dam in India, and there was a huge environment campaign against it, it also polarized our media in those days, when we are not so polarized politically. And now we have, even today, we have the vilification of the person who led that campaign. So those issues are very live. They are tied to national interest, as you very rightly said. So there is that constraint. But I'd like to just answer another question that you posed to other panelists, is how, I mean, is the reader or the television viewer not interested, or is it an editorial decision? I think it's it can be an editorial decision to tell climate stories, environment stories, climate change stories, climate resilience stories in a way that resonates with viewers. We have to take it out of the studios. Our news, our journalism now is so much inside studios. It's so much about just pulling a bunch of people together and debating the news of the day. You know, it's chatpata and it's fast, and you know, it's entertainment really. It's not even news. So we have to really train journalists to tell stories, climate stories, in a way that relate to people. And we have to take journalism out of studios into news gathering, put money in news gathering. I don't think there's any money now left in Indian studios for news gathering. It's just about, you know, studio debates. So that's fine.
Kanat, you have been an activist, you are a journalist, you have been bringing out this magazine. When it comes to reporting about climate change or environment, one thing that separates it from other fields in journalism is that there is very little room to be objective. And a lot of people say that you have to be an activist to take it further, because if you get into the whole issue of objectivity, he said that and she said that, and try to balance it off, the real message is really lost. Is it true, or if it is not, then how to handle the situation?
For sure, if we're in such, we're standing at the edge of the cliff. Actually, we're already falling down the cliff. So if we were to do he said journalism, it certainly doesn't serve the purpose of covering the climate crisis. No longer climate change. The semantics always catch up with us. Climate change, now we should be talking climate emergency. But then what I would say is, journalists, we talked earlier about whether journalists have failed, whether publishers have failed, society, journalists have written enough but not making an impact. I would say journalists are like the canary in the mine. what they come up with, howsoever inadequate, they are actually in the front line. I feel for various sociological reasons, the academics and the activists who should be picking up where the journalists left off, that is a gap. Because there is enough information out there provided by journalists with all their weaknesses. One of the primary weaknesses I would tell you is our inability to impact national affairs and impact geopolitical and cross-border affairs, especially in the arena of climate crisis or the movement of vectors, the movement of clouds and smog, etc. There's also a cross-border element to it. But information is all out there, brought primarily by journalists and journalist activists. It is not making an impact. So what we should be talking about is, how come we've not been able to jump the gap? And some will say, okay, the day of the media is over, it's the day of social media. Okay, then let's regard and understand how it is that social media can bring a change, given that it has all that reach, but very little depth. So I would come up with I have no answer other than to say that, put before you an example of doing activistic journalism and having a nil impact till now. And Somashri reminded me over lunch about an article I had written about 4 years ago about the Kosi embankments and the possibility of mega disaster in Bihar due to climate crisis related issues, such as the Kosi barrage was built in the time when we were going infrastructure mad in the 1950s. So barrages were built because you didn't believe that the Europeans who taught us barrage building didn't know about siltation. So our rivers are full of silt, and they're natural silt. They come here geologically. The river, Kosi River, which is the largest tributary of the Ganga, massive river, it's a sea. It is now riding over 60, 70 years, it is now riding on a riverbed that is about 18 to 20 feet above the outlying land. If now, to come to a crisis that we actually started developing 70 years ago, now with climate change, if there is a cloud burst up in the Mount Everest region, and there are glacial lake outburst floods, and there is a break of the dike along the Kosi, you could think of hundreds of thousands of dead overnight. Now, this article, this coverage, and if you say, okay, you have to do it on television, did it on television as well. Or you have to write a long form article, wrote a long form article. Or then you have to do it as a tweet, did a tweet. But the fact that there is this massive disaster up ahead, and it's bound to happen, and it will go all the way down to Bangladesh, from Kosi, which is the eastern Tarai of Nepal, into Bihar, Saharsa district of Bihar. All I can say right now to end is, everything is out there, but it has not converted to any kind of policy response. So the journalist has done his or her job, but it's not impacting.
Thank you. Amelia, on this issue of objectivity in the traditional way of reporting as we have been taught all years, do we need to ignore it because reporting about climate change is much more than just balancing out a story?
No, I actually do believe in being objective in all respects, and also including the subject of climate change. But, you know, our starting point has to be that what everybody's saying, which is, our starting point is the science tells you, there's facts, start with the facts like everything. The science tells you that the world is warming faster than any of the science models in fact had expected. And it's not a matter of debate anymore if there's climate change or not. So you start from that point, so you don't entertain any denialism. Unfortunately, at the moment we're confronted by one of, the world's most powerful individual is a climate denier. So we don't, it's just become, this is a problem. So that needs to be called out for what it is, which is false. And so when you say, do we need to be objective or not? Yes, we be objective. We can objectively say that that's false.
When I talk about objectivity, the reason I was asking this question was that supposing I was to do a story about coal-fired power plants, there will always be a kind of convincing version from those who are running those plants to give their side of the story. But when we know for a fact that it is polluting the environment, it is contributing to climate change and all those things, should we still try to get their version?
It's not about getting their version, but if we're reporting that, because we're reporting what companies are doing all the time in the FT, so we don't report it blindly. We don't say, oh, you know, this company's expanding and it's all great and coal. You know, you want to have in that story the balance is, it's causing X, Y, Z of emissions, you know, the cost of this to the climate, the recognition, hopefully, of the local government, if not international authorities, about what sort of contribution that makes to global warming. So you try and put it in that context wherever possible. I mean, at the moment, it's very, for us, for the FT, it's very challenging because even companies that we would have regarded as green companies are having problems and are being challenged. And so you have a Norwegian wind company now saying it's going to produce a quarter less wind and renewable energy next year because it can't afford to do it anymore. So you have to acknowledge in that story there's a climate impact. So it's not just an impact for that company, but a wider impact for society. And you can't force that company to spend money, lose money, to put in renewable energy. So that's where I guess, if you like, the balance comes in. But you must put the context of the world that you're operating in. But I would say that's true of all of the stories that we do about companies and governments. We want to hold them to account in the most important way.
Thank you. Shumashri, since you have got a team where climate journalism is an important element, do you think there is a need to have some kind of scientific training for journalists who are covering climate issues, or they can be like any other journalist and any beat reporter can be given that story?
It's interesting that you mentioned this because in the same Reuters Institute report that I was citing earlier, apparently it actually turns people off reports which are headlined, "Scientists say the world is growing hotter," because they don't want to listen to what scientists say anymore. What they really want is to know how it's going to impact them on a day-to-day basis. So for instance, in LA when the wildfire started, most people didn't know what kind of shoes to wear. They were wearing boots which were melting in the fire. So, one way in which we can mitigate this, especially in the subcontinent, we consign science to people who know science best, and we let it in very little into our lives, especially journalists. So one way to get over the fact that most journalists will not have the training required to cover a scientific phenomenon like climate change is possibly to bring it down to the most local level in which it affects us. Say there's a flood warning, what sort of medicines should I buy so that my kids don't get diarrhea is one of the ways in which we can possibly improve the local connect. Scientific training would be useful, but then for a branch of science which is changing so quickly and on which experts differ so much as climate change, I feel like it'll be taking on a lot for newsrooms which are already struggling with quite a lot when it comes to reporting on climate.
Okay, now we come to Mr. Mushahid Hussain, somebody who has been a journalist for a very long time and then also a politician. Mushahid, you have experienced journalism, you have been writing for a very long time, but then you decided to move into mainstream politics, and whether you are still a politician or not, I don't know. Tell me, in an environment like Pakistan where politics dominates so much of discourse, is there a room for discussion on climate change?
I think that's a very good question, but the room has been created not by the policymakers or the politicians, but by the emerging ground realities that we in Pakistan and the region face. Because climate change is a borderless issue. It's one issue which is borderless across the whole region. And willy-nilly, the policymakers or the political leadership has to take notice of it. For example, in the last 20 years, We have seen over 150 freak weather incidents in Pakistan alone. Flash floods, melting glaciers, forest fires, and regular dislocation of so many people. So now it has been put on the agenda. I remember when 10 years ago in the parliament, I started the first public hearings on environment and climate change. People were not taking it seriously. So I had a friend from Dawn actually, and he produced the first media manual on environmental reporting. Dr. Sajjad, by the way. So that was how we said we'll educate those who need to be educated. And then we also talked, I was chairman of the defense committee also in the parliament, and I told the people in Khaki also that look, there was a big avalanche in Gyari in the Siachen area. About 200 people were killed, swept away. And so this, like Siachen, we proposed actually to our Indian friends also that let's start with a cooperation on climate change by converting Siachen into a peace park by demilitarization, withdrawal of Pakistani troops, withdrawal of Indian troops, because what are you fighting for? There's not a blade of grass there. So I think that now the issue has come on the agenda because we are facing it directly. When you talk of smog in Lahore, it's the same in Delhi. And you talk issues here also. But I remember in the Muslim days when we first mentioned about stone crushing in the Margalas or some kind of pollution, it was unthinkable. So what is this issue, environment? It was not there. But now I think it has been injected into the discourse because of the new ground realities, in not just in Pakistan but in the region as a regional issue.
Mushahid, that's all so very true. But the thing is, in a situation where India and Pakistan are not even willing to play cricket matches in each other's countries, you are talking about cooperation and collaboration at a level that is unthinkable. Do you think Mahfouz can also contribute, Nirupama can also jump in, that is it really possible to have this kind of collaboration?
Let us start from Pakistan and the other countries of South Asia with whom we do not have conflicts, say Nepal or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Maldives. And I think India will have to catch on because this is something which affects their future also.
Now you're commenting as a politician. Ignore India and move to other countries.
Well, if they're not willing to come in.
Can I jump in? You know what Dawn has done with this conference? In another time, it would have been possible to imagine that this would have been a government level thing. But Dawn has really, taken the lead in bringing together civil society and media from all these countries. I think that's the way forward. That civil society and media take the lead in this matter and not wait for governments. Because everybody recognizes that these are kind of borderless issues. There's pollution in this Punjab and the other Punjab, river water flows, whatnot. And, everybody is affected. So I think the civil society, which is so degraded now, which is so vilified, journalism, people say, governments say, what are journalists for? Why are you even here? What's your role? So, to jump that, I think we need to have collaborations between civil society with media. I remember, Zafar, that Dawn and the Hindu collaborated on WikiLeaks. Why doesn't the media think about collaborations like that, cross-border collaborations? And that may be a way forward.
Karan, you have to say something.
Yeah, you asked Mushahid the question about about India and Pakistan. Well, I think as long as New Delhi and Islamabad can't sit across the table together, such as even to call a conference, a summit of SAARC, which should have happened here in Islamabad in 2016 and has yet to, is still hanging fire. No, 2014 was the last summit. 2016 would have been the next summit, the 19th summit. I would say as long as that doesn't happen, we can't let everything else remain in status. So, if at all possible, and we know even they have to go through Delhi or Islamabad, Punjab could be the key for the rest of South Asia. Rajasthan and Sindh could try opening some of their doors, at least the discourse, if not to have a summit a Punjab summit, which may be very difficult to bring about, but there's enough ways to interact. But even going beyond India and Pakistan, I would suggest to Mushahid that right around Lahore is the starting output of agricultural waste burning and thermal power stations and vehicular emissions. It all goes up to 15,000 feet. 8 months of the year, the westerlies carry all of this eastward towards Nepal. Forget about for now Punjab, Indian Punjab and Haryana and Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, and onward to Bangladesh. I would suggest this haze, which starts in the Pakistani Punjab and beyond, and mixed it with haze from the Indian Punjab, etc., comes across, and from Kathmandu you can't even see the mountains. There's no Himalaya to be seen for much of the year now, which is a new phenomenon. And some of that is because of haze that is starting in the Pakistani Punjab and added to from Pakistan, Indian Punjab, etc. So there should be some sensitivity in Pakistan, and maybe it is the failure of Nepal, Nepal's government, Nepal's civil society, unable to impact the Pakistani consciousness, that you also have something to do with it. And if you can't talk to India, at least talk to us, because not only is it a matter of aesthetics that the mountains don't have snows, not only is it a matter of tourism that we can't have mountain tourism when there are no snow in the mountains, but it has to do with groundwater. It has to do with the fact that there is no groundwater when there is no winter snow left, and hence it will impact hundreds of millions in the plains. So for this reason, even if India will not talk to us, Pakistan and Nepal talking will help the people of the Gangetic plains.
Mahfouz, do you think the editors of leading South Asian newspapers can play a role in starting a debate about what is happening in terms of climate change in this region, and can try and reduce the impact of climate change?
I think they can do a great deal of things, but to start with, we'll have to be very conscious that our region is replete with suspicion, prejudice. So one decision will be that we'll try and avoid any issue that impinges on the other country negatively. Now you can say, oh, that's not possible in a climate thing, he just talked about the maize, the water and all that. My first suggestion would be that we create a conclave of, say, editors or newspapers who are very, very environmentally committed, point one. Point two, that in that meeting we bring in the social media, the news platforms, we talk about podcasts, we talk about multimedia, short films and all that. Now, number three is that we separate the issues, some of which are global, regional, and some of which are national. For example, the overuse of groundwater in Bangladesh, nobody is responsible but us in Bangladesh. There are city pollutions. So we could have a series of issues which are very, very national, and we can start by reporting on this, having short films on this, multimedia podcast, and then exchange that between the group of editors who first of all sign up. And I would say, all papers who have originally and through their company, through their editorial policy, have a strong commitment to environmental issues. Now, I would suggest that I have been a part of track 2 and discussions for years. I'm 75 and a half at the moment. So I've seen a lot. In 6 months I'll be 76. Now, so I've seen a lot. So we will have to start with tremendous awareness that politics vitiates everything, destroys every effort. So we start very modestly with a commitment among media houses who understand the impact of the climate issues, understand that our very survival depends on it, and so move on step by step.
Okay, we are running out of time. I'll ask all the panelists, give them 1 minute each, to say that is it possible for all of us to campaign to make climate change issue center stage as far as the media is concerned and through the media in the society, starting with Shomashri.
There's only one answer to this. Yes, of course. We do need to keep on telling the stories of people. If climate change as an issue seems too big, then we do need to get down to just the people that are suffering, and then increase our ambit from there onwards, so to speak. We also, as journalists, need to deviate from the language that we are accustomed to, which is this illegal, and if it is illegal, who are the ones doing the illegal things, and develop this narrative that does justice to the languages in which tribal people, the languages in which climate activists have always spoken. We need to listen to the wisdom of nature, so to speak, and even though this doesn't correspond to the very direct manner in which we are accustomed to writing the news, some degree of humanity in our jobs, instilling some degree of empathy will help us develop this common vision for all of South Asia.
Thank you. Ali.
Well, we have to recognize that climate change is first and foremost a development issue. It's very closely linked with vulnerability and poverty of people. Readers want to hear more about their lives and their livelihoods. Nobody stops the editors in any of these countries from reporting on the development issues in other countries. Oftentimes, the newsrooms focus on the political news only, or the disasters. So the question is, how best can editor be informed to mainstream development issues in neighboring countries? That is the first thing. Second, at least in Pakistan, I cannot say much for India or some other country, the debate is debased for two reasons. One, we think it is the international community's obligation to compensate our vulnerability based on principles of justice. My submission is that climate change is always a local issue. There will always be local solutions, but that will require regional approaches. And once we have that, then we'll need international finance. Otherwise, international finance will be very top-down, it will seldom reach. I think the editors need to understand that how best to promote local level actions in their coverage.
Nirupama, is there a hope that journalists through these campaigns can make it mainstream, the issue?
Yeah, I think there is an awareness, there's a growing awareness that this is something to which you have to devote time and space. Even in Indian newsrooms, you see that now, that you have, Somashri said that, Wire is of course very well equipped with all its, with so many journalists covering this issue. But even in other newspapers, for instance, I worked in Indian Express and the Hindu, where these issues are given importance. So there is an awareness about these issues, and that we have to move beyond disaster, covering these stories as just as disasters and telling people's stories, because as was pointed out here, these are directly to do with poverty, deprivation, justice, inequalities. So in a sense, when we cover those subjects well, if we cover those subjects well, we will also be covering climate change in a sense, because some of those effects as are manifest in inequality and poverty are because of climate change. So I think as journalists who cover those things, you will be covering climate change as well, but there has to be a commitment to that, and that commitment is sometimes, it's patchy. It's there and it's not there. And sometimes it can be a friend of, the senior most leader in the country, who's the coal king of the country, and then, how do you deal with this? So there are those issues. But I think if the senior editors in the newsroom commit to it, things are possible.
Mushahid.
I remember 40 years ago as editor of the Muslim, we organized in this very city the first Pakistan-India track tour, where we had journalists, about 20 people came from India, and that opened the doors for people in Pakistan writing for the Indian press. I used to write for Times of India, Hindustan Times, MJ Akbar's Telegraph, Kuldeep Nair, Bhavani San Gupta, Pran Chopra were writing for my paper. So that opened up that, I think, window which was there. So I feel that right now this is a more conducive environment with online, and you can cut through the censorship and state policies. And Dawn has taken a very timely initiative with your own vision, your own money, and hosting people from all across South Asia. So I think it's doable. It requires vision, but I think the owners also should invest money in it. And I think the journalists are ready for that.
Yes, Kara, your views, quickly please.
My turn?
Go on. No, Kara.
Oh, so Zafar, I will answer your question with, in two prongs. One is politics, how to impact national politics vis-a-vis the climate crisis. One is how to impact geopolitics, regional geopolitics vis-a-vis the climate crisis. And of course there are deeper issues on both sides. On national politics, to get behavioral change at the national level, you have to go beyond the English language media. And we actually, by and large, there are exceptions particularly in Bangladesh and in Nepal, but English language media seems to be at the forefront when it comes to covering the climate crisis. And we must move into what in India is called the language media, or let's call it vernacular media is the term that I prefer, perhaps because there is no colonial baggage in Kathmandu. But vernacular media is where you need to get to the crux of the matter of climate crisis. That will impact national politics. English is a little remote. That's number one. In terms of impacting geopolitics, essentially we have to fall back on English and ensure that we create such a hubbub that the national capitals can no longer ignore the need to collaborate, and now in a way regard the climate crisis as an opportunity to make up for lost time and reignite conversations between the national capitals. That of course can only happen in English. And finally, going into so-called new media, there are influencers in each of our countries, quote-unquote influencers, who have massive followings, but they are not yet doing cross-border journalism. How can we get these influencers to come into climate crisis?
Thank you. The importance of climate journalism. Do you think, or do you feel that in developing countries like Pakistan, India and elsewhere, the realization is coming in, or one day we can see climate journalism as a mainstream journalism?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's the lived experience, isn't it? And I think media in every country is a mirror, it's a reflection of a society. People like to think, I mean, that's the one thing I would take a little bit issue in, and people like to think the media is leading society. If media was leading society, it might be a different society. I think that media is a mirror. It reflects what's going on. And one of the most interesting things from a journalistic perspective to me is the disconnect between the lived experience of everybody and the science, which is that it's the hottest time ever around the world and there are fires in rich countries are experiencing this climate change. And the response from government and companies, which is now the opposite. So they are now backtracking. And it's just a couple of things I would say is, one, to pick up on what some of my very learned colleagues here have said. I think we need to use all of our storytelling tools everywhere. So social media, video, we have to meet the audience wherever the audience is. Wherever the audience is reading and watching and viewing, if we need to say it in 30 seconds, we need to be good communicators to say it in 30 seconds. We did a climate game, we called it, at the FT. It took us 6 months to build. The IEA provided the modelling. It's a very scientific game, but it challenges you, can you keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees? It's free. 2 million people have played it. We roll it out to schools. So there are many different ways in which you can play the role of media, which is, I see, not so much as advocacy as the other key issues, which is to hold companies and government to account. And I would just leave you with one thing, which is because companies and governments are backtracking, and there is, I think, a fear of what Harjit Singh called yesterday Trumpism, which I think is it's not just Trump, it's Trumpism, and I thought that was a very good observation. There's going to be a squeeze on scientific bodies, science funding, where the sources of information come from, the trusted sources of information beyond the media, the ones that we rely upon. If we didn't have scientific reports to tell us exactly what the weather is doing or climate is doing, that would be very difficult. And I can see now, I think the next really big story is going to be the squeeze on these sources of trusted information, scientists and data and organizations that are there to provide the information, the reliable information to people like us who are looking for it.
Mahfouz, from your own experience of running a newspaper for a very long time, being a journalist covering this region, will there ever be a time where newspapers and other media outlets will see climate change story as a front page story?
I'm proud to say that we've already done it in the Daily Star. So much of environment reporting that one of my readers came in, rang me up and said, why didn't you rename the Star and call the Daily Environmental Star?
So good to know that.
No, so I really have a concrete suggestion that on the Daily Star, I volunteer. You have already taken a step. So Daily Star, Dawn, then there is Himal from India, then Nirupoma can speak, I mean, as a freelancer. But we have these two organized, three. Then can we reach out to, say, Hindu or Indian Express and say, can we do this? So start very small, but start immediately and have India, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Nepal come together on a very small journalistic level and see how it grows. And I would like to multiply this by saying you involve the multimedias in it. You have a huge, multimedia department. I have, Nepal, Himal has. So, but I would say 3-4 editors or 5 editors, 2 from India and 1 of each from us. We can meet. I volunteer to pay my own fare and come wherever you do it. But then have a brainstorm, and it will be one thing, non-political. Everything in our South Asia, politics touches it, and it gets destroyed.
And I will say, we in Nepal will host that event at our cost.
Great, good to know that.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, here was the distinguished panel from the media houses, from sharing their own experiences. We at Dawn has contributed whatever was worth of starting a debate in Pakistan and trying to attract people from elsewhere, mostly journalists and other experts, to raise the issue about climate change in Pakistan. The hope is that not just the politicians, not just the government officials, but the non-governmental organizations, the media houses, they all realize that how important it is to work on the climate change issue, to campaign on the climate change issue, and this conference, we hope, will lead and will guide other media houses to have similar campaigns, not just in Pakistan, but in other countries in the region, and hopefully we will continue to contribute whatever it's worth to keep this campaign going. Thank you very much for attending this session.